Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Hormonally Speaking. Glad you're here with us as always. I have another wonderful guest this week, and we're going to talk all about hormones. We're going to talk about all the fun things that go into helping your hormones and figuring out what is going wrong when you're not feeling so good. And her name is Kasey Goins, and she's a functional diagnostic nutritionist, expert in women's health, and former physician assistant. Over the last 3 years, she has helped hundreds of women overcome hormonal imbalances naturally with a root cause approach through group programs and one-on-one work. You can start your own healing journey by downloading her free detox guide on her website at kaseygoins.com. Welcome, Kasey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so glad that you are here. So I definitely want to dive into your story, but let's start off with, I think this is a big question for so many women when they have what they think is hormonal imbalance, right? Because a lot of times we put everything on hormones when it's not always that simple, right? But when they think there's hormonal imbalance going on, where do you feel like is the best place for them to start?
Yeah, so I love this question because there's a couple different facets of this.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I think is like anytime anything is going wrong with our body symptom wise, anytime we deviate from normal, first and foremost, like that's our cue that we need to dive deeper. And that's our
Mm-hmm.
cue that something is wrong in the body. And it's up to us to actually look and start to explore,
Mm-hmm.
because we've been told like our entire lives that what we consider to be common is normal, and it's just not the case.
Right.
So anytime there's a hormonal imbalance, like we always want to dig deeper, we always want to ask why and what's driving it. um and the second piece of this too is like I always have I have all of my clients start with minerals, like
Mm-hmm.
always.
Mm-hmm.
They are, your top four, your calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, like those are the spark plugs to your hormones. If your minerals are
Mm-hmm.
off, your hormones are going to be off too. So
Mm-hmm.
we do a lot of work on balancing minerals. We do a lot of work with nutrient density, and that's really what fuels our hormones into a better state.
Nice. So with the minerals, do you have a particular test that you like doing above others? Because I know there's different options out there.
Yeah. So in my practice right now, so in my one-on-one practice, and then inside of one of our group programs, we use a hair tissue mineral analysis
Mm-hmm.
test through Trace Elements. I love that test. It just
Mm-hmm.
gives us like such valuable info. Again, like how our hormones are functioning is determined by how our minerals are functioning. So I love
Mm-hmm.
using the HTMA test for that. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And it's a pretty affordable test, right? When it comes
Super.
to testing,
Yeah,
right? Like
super.
before you go in for like the big expensive guns that are going to actually, tell you your hormonal makeup, it's like, but yeah, let's get underneath it and see what's going on. And can you explain to women too, because, as you just mentioned, minerals are the spark plugs of our hormones, but also our cells, our cellular structure and
Yes.
mitochondria and our adrenals,
Yeah.
which are such a big part of hormone balance and imbalance. Can you kind of talk about that connection, particularly with the adrenals?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a huge connection between all of it. Like everything affects everything in the body. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you think of it kind of like a pyramid, your hormones are the very tip of the pyramid. They're always like the last thing to fall.
Mm-hmm.
So if our hormones are dysfunctional, we've got like layers of work deeper to do beyond that. And so kind of going back to the adrenals
Mm-hmm.
specifically, thinking about the role that cortisol and that stress plays in the body. If we're under a tremendous amount of stress, or we're type A's and we're perfectionists, so we don't know how to cope with things, and our adrenals are like constantly pumping out the cortisol, it's going to dysregulate our blood sugar, it's going to increase our estrogen, it's going to drop our progesterone. And so now all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden we've got hormonal chaos. That's not the hormones that are the problem, it's the
Mm-hmm.
stress that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so resolving that, and then also resolving the underlying metabolic stressors, looking at our cellular health is the first place to start.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think so many, I mean, not just women, but people in general have mineral imbalances going on?
Oh my gosh, I'm just like, it's like such a loaded question.
Yeah, sorry, that's
But
not an easy
like,
one.
no, but like, I mean, just like look at the way that we live. Like the vast majority of us, we're working We're working 8 to 5 office jobs. We don't see the light of day. We don't get out in nature. We're sleeping terrible. We're running on caffeine. We're eating processed foods. We're skipping meals. We're not eating enough protein. I mean, like that all right there is going to just
You're all done and done.
Yeah, right. Like we're just depleting the body further and further and further. You know, the more stress that we're under, the more that we're depleting our body of these precious minerals that really make up the way that we run. The other thing that I would add to that too is like our environment. You know, the way that we like practice agriculture, the way that we farm, like our soil is just depleted of minerals. And so a lot of these things can be really difficult to get in if we're not focused on it.
Yeah. And, you know, I like to remind people because I feel like for so long, people understood that you have to eat food to survive, right? And to get calories. But the allopathic medical system has never made that connection that the literal nutrients, the vitamins and the minerals and, you know, all the trace elements in these foods actually make up our entire body. They make up our cells, they make up our tissues, they make up our bones, they make up our hormones or neurotransmitters, right? And so sometimes I think that in and of itself is mind blowing for people to really start to equate like that food is there for us to break it down and get all of these nutrients in order to not only survive, but thrive. So if you're not getting it, it's not going to happen.
Exactly. It's always the place that we start is with nutrition. And it still blows my mind that the medical community has not kind of almost like caught up to that yet. Like I don't even want to say caught up because like that's the way it's always been.
Right.
You know, but then, you know, then we bring in modern medicine and a lot of like, you know, diagnosing based on symptoms and prescribing a Band-Aid treatment for it. And it's like, well, you know, are you even like, is anybody even asking how you're eating and how you're sleeping and how your stress is and like all that stuff?
Yeah. So you were a PA previously, right? So you know the system very well.
Yes. Yeah. Very well.
Yeah. And so it was funny because I actually was just talking to another doctor who moved into functional medicine, and she really explained so well about how, you know, it's like, you have to code things, right? Like if it hasn't been sort of researched and, you know, falling into this diagnosis and coded so the insurance can do this and this, and it's this whole process, then it's like it doesn't exist. Like, for example, adrenal dysregulation. A lot of doctors, traditional doctors, don't necessarily believe in it, right? They only believe once your adrenals have gone kaput or, you know, you have Graves' disease or something like that, right? So when you were working in that, I mean, were you just finding yourself frustrated, or at that point were you like, I just don't know anything different, or how was that?
It's really interesting because as I always like to tell people, I've been on both sides of the table. So like, you know, on the one side of the table, like practicing medicine, I practiced as a PA for 6 years. And then the other side of the table, like having my own hormonal struggles and like, you know, losing my period for 3 years and all my labs were normal and like, you know, hair loss and anxiety and like all those things that went with it. And so like, I know what it's like to kind of be in both worlds. But when I went to PA school, you know, like right out of college, I was like, this is it. Like modern medicine is the way, you know, like this is the only way, like we are healing people. And I got about 2 years into practice and I was like, what the heck are we doing? Like I literally, like, I just was prescribing like all day, every day, I mean, thousands of prescriptions for things that I know could be solved with a better diet and some exercise and some sunlight. And like, there was just such a big disconnect. And so part of what really turned me on to functional medicine was I just felt like I was doing so much pill pushing. But there was a lot of frustration too, especially with the way that, you know, it kind of insurance came in and the way that billing worked. And it's like, the more patients you saw and the more complex patients you saw, the more money the hospital system made. And that drove me nuts. I was like, this is not a health-based system. This is just another money-driven system.
Right. So was it during that time when you were practicing as a PA that you lost your period for 3 years?
It was before that. It was actually during PA school.
Of course.
Of course.
Surprise. Yeah.
I know. All the stress. All the caffeine. All the under eating. Yep.
So did your doctors want to put you on birth control, I'm assuming, to quote unquote regulate your hormones?
You know, actually I was already on birth control.
Oh,
Makes it even worse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my journey with my hormones really stemmed from being so deep into the fitness industry and being so deep into bodybuilding. I was way overtraining, way under
Mm,
eating,
mm-hmm.
and very hypothyroid.
Oh
And
man.
my body just was like, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
So, your body will turn off your reproductive system and turns off unimportant functions if it's
Yep.
trying to survive.
Yep.
And then the stress of PA school on top of that. So yeah, I was actually on birth control for about 12 years before I was off.
Oh wow.
Mhm.
So then how did you end up getting your period back?
I mean, it was kind of a conglomeration of things, but one being eating more, training less.
Mm-hmm.
Really focusing on like back then I was eating very low carb, and so it was increasing carb intake,
Mm-hmm.
increasing caloric intake overall, but also like just changing the nutrient density of, I was
Mm,
so used to living on like, what we would call like macro friendly foods, like the sugar free things and the fat free things,
mm-hmm.
not even realizing the ingredients that I was putting into my body.
Yeah.
And so a shift away from that and into more whole foods, more nutrient dense foods for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of simple in a lot of ways, right? Like
Yeah.
but it's so hard because we live in a culture that's like, even, I mean, I get caught in it sometimes too, right? It's like, even if it's healthy food, these fast foods
Yeah.
tend to have a lot of ingredients in them, and so it's like, I'm not saying for people to never eat them at all, but it's just when that becomes a huge part of your diet, it's going to have its impact for sure.
It definitely will.
So what finally made you decide to sort of be done with being a PA and go into the functional side of things?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's kind of been like a journey over the last 3 years, I would say. So what I did is when I entered into my functional medicine training, I
Mm-hmm.
was still working as a PA.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of like built up my business on the side. I was working a lot of like weekends, a lot of nights,
Yeah.
kind of
Your
building
poor
things up on the
adrenals.
side. I know. I know. They definitely need a lot of replenishment. So building things up on the side, and then eventually, actually, this past January, they let me
Mhm.
go. I got fired from
Mm,
my corporate job, and I was like, "This is the best blessing in
perfect.
disguise."
Yeah.
Yeah, it was literally just the catalyst that I
Yeah.
needed to keep
Yep.
going. Yep.
Well, and I love that you bring that up because I think I see a lot of women going through big struggles around their health right now, right? And sometimes we need to make those big changes in
Yeah.
order for our health to really change. I
Yep.
mean, there's so many things that obviously the minerals, the diet, the movement, all those things are so important that a lot of us are missing. But sometimes when that stress is so big from a job or being, in a with a partner that things aren't working well or what have you, like sometimes that's what's got to change in order for our health to change.
It really is. And
Yeah.
it's the part that most people don't want to acknowledge or
Yeah.
address. We can all change the way that we eat, and we can all change the way
Yep.
that we, support our liver and like less
Yep.
caffeine and stuff. But I mean, it's, if there's a major stressor that's really unresolved, that's going to
Mhm.
take its toll.
Yep. Exactly. It's going to keep like clawing at you until you like pay attention to it too, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest issues that you see with the women that are coming to work with you in terms of the hormone issues?
Yeah, honestly, like everything's kind of across the board. A lot of PCOS, a lot of endometriosis,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of just, estrogen dominant type situations. So really
Mm-hmm.
painful, heavy, long periods, PMDD, PMS, hair loss, anxiety, depression, thyroid issues,
All the good
kind of
stuff.
all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of it does have the same base root that it's coming from, right?
Yes, it
Yeah.
does.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just it always comes from like stress on the metabolism.
Yeah.
It's always that metabolic stress is going to just like throw off every system in the
Yep.
body.
Yep. And there you go. So once you kind of work with them on rebalancing their minerals, what is usually sort of the next step?
Yeah, so I think we kind of take a very like, I don't want to say holistic approach, but even though it is, but
Mm-hmm.
kind of just like a well-rounded approach.
Mm-hmm.
So like while we're working on balancing minerals, we're also like just packing their diet full of nutrients. So we're working on like, okay, are you eating enough protein? Are we getting a lot of like whole food complex carbs? Do we have enough fats in the diet? Are we, getting, things like grass-fed beef liver, just lots of like nutrients in that way. And at the same time, kind of putting in some supplements to bridge gaps where we need to bridge gaps. Supporting detox systems and gut health, like we kind of just pull it all in a little bit at a time together.
I know. And sometimes it's like we have to figure out per the individual, like what they can and can't handle at any given time. Right. So
yeah,
some can go slower and some can go faster and all of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, because people always, come to me about this and ask me. So what are your thoughts on how much protein a woman should be getting a day? How many grams?
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy around that.
Yep.
I usually go for like 100 grams a day minimum. So a lot of women will need more than that, especially like if you're active, if you're trying to, put muscle mass on, something like that. PCOS, a lot of times will need a little bit more protein too, but 100 grams a day minimum.
Yeah. I know, it's crazy, right? Because I'll often start my clients off on, let's get you to 80, because so many of them will literally be getting like 40 grams of protein a day,
I know.
And I'm like, you need to be getting like 30 grams of breakfast. Not 40 grams for your day. So, but it blows people's minds, right? Because they're like, that's a lot of protein. And I'm like, it's like, if you start to, it's hard to do it if you're vegetarian, obviously. Pretty impossible if you're vegan. So, it definitely can mean different food choices for different people.
Yeah, it for sure can. And I also think like, transitioning into that, like just being more conscientious of like, what am I actually eating? Because a lot of people come in and it's like, either they're skipping breakfast, which okay, there's 30 grams of protein gone right there.
Right. And they're drinking coffee.
Yeah. Or it's like, a muffin or a granola bar or a piece of toast. And it's like, okay, so even just like focusing on like that one simple shift can sometimes be enough to just like change the game for people.
100%. That's why I always say, I'm like, breakfast. If you can get that down, it's going to change your day,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Your blood sugar is like, all right, I can do it now to make it through the day. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. What are some of the other like big things around diet that women kind of struggle with, do you feel like, when they come to see you?
I feel like honestly, a lot of it is convenience. A lot of women, I mean, let's just face it, like we're busy people, we're on the go and we've got jobs and we've got kids and families and like, we're constantly doing things.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the hardest things for people is like finding the time to cook, honestly.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
it can be really difficult. I mean, fortunately now, like there are some really good options for like meal delivery services,
exactly,
something like that. Yeah,
I know. A lot of women will feel guilty about doing that, or some women will, or like they're like, I shouldn't spend the money. I'm like, look, if you can't do it, if you can't find the time, if you don't have time to shop, like it's so worth it. Don't feel guilty about it. You're doing 5 million things. Like it's okay to take care of yourself in this way.
Yes, I think it's so worth it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I was trying to think of sort of the other thing, definitely the cooking. And I feel like shifting that, not eating such a big meal at night necessarily, and eating that bigger meal in the morning is like that sort of, because culturally we're the opposite, right? It's like eat a small breakfast, often eat a small lunch. And then you're starving by the end of the day, right? So you eat this like huge meal at night, and it's like, we need to flip that around. Yeah.
It's a very big switch. That's a very big switch. And I also feel just like taking the time and like kind of slowing down a little bit too, like actually like enjoying our food, enjoying our meals is hard.
And not be like working while we're eating and watching TV or whatever, being on our phones. Yeah. That's some of the biggest stuff. What about movement? Is that an issue for a lot of the women that come to you?
I would say yes and no. So I've gotten a lot of questions lately about like HIIT training, like why is that, or like cardio, like why is that like so impactful for the body? And the thing is with movement, the way that we choose to move our bodies can either be beneficial to us on our journey, or it can compound stress hormones. And so we want to make sure that we're choosing like the right type of movement that's actually going to support us, and even like support where we're at in our menstrual cycle too. You know, as our hormones fluctuate and things will start to change. We're actually doing an upcoming workshop on this, which I'm really excited about. But as things will fluctuate with the menstrual cycle, our movement should change a little bit, and the way that we work should change a little bit. So if all we're doing is like, you know, HIIT training, CrossFit, spin, you know, long intense cardio sessions, like if we're driving up that cortisol, we're going to make it more difficult for our bodies to heal. So fortunately, like I, you know, feel really grateful that I have come from like a weightlifting background, you know, where, because like that's like one of the biggest pieces we'll pull in, and walking. I mean, like walking is like so foundational.
100%.
So foundational.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I tell people I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Asheville, North Carolina. And so I'm lucky, right? Because they have this like beautiful mountains right outside my door. But like the impacts of walking, even if it's just around your neighborhood, you know, because not only is it just a very easy thing on the body generally, you know, I mean, not everyone's body, but for the most part, but you're also connecting with nature, which is such a huge thing that we are disconnected from. I have to tell this little story, even though it's kind of like, it's funny, but I haven't seen this TikTok trend, but my friend was telling me about it, where you stand next to a tree, like kind of close. Have you heard about this?
I haven't seen this. No.
Okay. So it's like, you know, you want it to be to where a branch is like no more than maybe like 5 or 6 inches from you or something. And you just kind of whisper to it, you know, tree, if you hear me, touch my shoulder, or tree, if you hear me, touch my face. And the tree branch will like come and touch people. Right. And I was like, really? And my friend actually showed a video to me of her doing it. And it was just such a good reminder, right? That like, we are connected to nature, you know, like,
absolutely,
like in such small ways that we don't even think about it. But like, if you actually get outside and connect with it, like it can be one of the most healing things out of everything, because we're supposed to be out there. Like that's how we were born, right? That's how human beings have always lived in concert, and we've just gotten so out of that. So I love that trend, because it really shows specifically, you know, the little branch coming to you and touching you.
That is so cool. I'm going to be on the lookout for it now. Every time I open TikTok, I'm going to like look for that trend.
I know, because I was thinking I need to start sharing it with some of my clients, because I feel like it's a very impactful, like, yes, see, we are connected to nature, not just this like, I don't know, you know, ethereal idea that we are, you know, or woo-woo kind of thing. So it makes a huge difference.
It does. Yeah. And there's even like, you know, there's even upcoming research on like how, you know, just getting your feet in soil impacts the gut microbiome.
Yes.
You know, and like, I mean, that's huge if you think about it. Like it's just your feet in soil, but like you're positively impacting your gut bacteria. And like that has huge impacts on your health.
Absolutely. And I was just talking about this on another podcast, and this happened to me. You know, I had COVID late December, early January of this year, and I had a mild case, but probably about a month later, my gut was just off. Right. And studies are coming out now showing that COVID changes our gut microbiome. And so it's even more important, like what you're saying, like get your feet in the soil, you know, really, you got to be nice to your microbiome if you've had COVID, which a majority of us have had at this point, you know, or we'll be getting it. And so really kind of thinking about that and the healing process from it too is hugely important.
Yeah, for sure. And it kind of just like circles back to like what we talked about earlier, like it's our body systems that need to be supported, and our gut health is one of those things.
Absolutely.
You know, I always like to tell my clients, like, you know, when we're thinking about hormones, everyone thinks about like estrogen and progesterone. We're talking about sex hormones. And, you know, estrogen really is moved out of the body through waste, and part of it is metabolized in the gut. So if your gut's not healthy, you're not going to be like moving estrogen out very well. It's going to get recirculated. You're going to continue to have problems with estrogen dominance. And so it always comes back to those systems.
100%. You got to get them all, like, they want to work well, right? It's just like, we just need to like give them the tools that they need in order to work properly. let's bring it back around to stress, since I think that's such a huge, obviously important factor. What are some of the things that you recommend to women to start to de-stress?
Yeah, it really depends on the person. And I think when it comes to stress, like you have to find something that you enjoy doing, because if you hate it, it's not going to stick and there's no point.
So people are like, I don't like meditating. I'm like, all right, let's figure something else out.
Don't do it. Yeah. And we have, a ton of different modalities. I have some clients that do have history of trauma, and they are in therapy and EMDR, and like that, nervous system re-regulation needs to be happening. But even on a daily basis, I have a lot of clients that will journal or gratitude journal. I have a lot of clients that spend time in prayer. Even just like finding 10 minutes for yourself, if you're busy and you have kids, like if you can just close yourself in a bedroom for like 10 minutes and just kind of sit there and breathe, that's going to have like huge, profound impacts on your stress levels, on your cortisol levels, just even doing that. It's so 100%. Like basic, like it's so like basic sounding, but like it really just needs to be basic.
But it's so hard for people they feel like to carve out 5 to 10 minutes a day for, especially women, for themselves. For sure. Right. So it's like this basic thing that I struggle with doing. And so that's why I like to bring it up as much as I can on this podcast, and like have people that are listening to the podcast hear it from as many different practitioners as possible. Right. Because we need to hear these things multiple times, right, for them to get in. And just to bring it back around, so what other testing do you end up doing besides the minerals? Do you just focus on the minerals, or are there other tests?
No. So with one-on-one, we dive deeper. So we'll run a GI map, so looking at stool testing. If anyone has, obviously if anyone is having like digestive issues, but any history of like autoimmunity, frequent antibiotic use, like I always like to dig into the gut a little bit there. I also do, so we do blood labs. So we'll do full set of blood labs, iron panels, full thyroid panels, like all the good stuff. I have run Dutch tests in the past. So like actually like looking at hormones, metabolites breakdown. I don't run it as much as I used to, honestly, because I just find that like by working on all all the things and doing all of those other testing, like we often don't need to touch the hormones. There are specific cases that I will run it. And then I've also gotten really into iodine testing as well. So we'll do urine iodine testing.
Okay. So tell us more about this, because I know that there's debates on which iodine test is good or not. So I'm super interested to hear what you have to say.
I personally have been using the Hakala Labs 24-hour urine collection. So looking at urinary excretion of iodine. Okay.
Is that one where you have to take iodine and see how much excretes, or yes?
It's a loading dose tablet that you take, and then you do a 24-hour urine collection essentially. And so that's a lab.
Gotcha. Okay. And is it usually like 50 milligrams of iodine, or?
Gosh, I can't even remember. I think it is. It's a really high dose.
Yeah.
It's a really high dose.
And do you end up finding that a lot of women are low in iodine?
A lot of them. Yeah. A lot of them.
So what are your thoughts on sort of dosing iodine? And I know obviously it's dependent on what's showing up on their test, but there's a lot of debate around that too, right? And obviously like if you have Hashimoto's versus if you don't, but tell me your thoughts on it.
So there's iodine is like such a heavily debated topic, and a lot of it was pushed from the Wolff-Chaikoff study, way back when, and the mainstream media catches on, the medical community catches on, and all of a sudden, we were using iodine for basically everything. It was an antiseptic. we literally use it for everything. And all of a sudden it's like, it's gonna destroy your thyroid glands, and like they can't even replicate that study now. So the RDA sets the recommendations for dietary intake of iodine at 150 micrograms, which is actually really low. I was like, very, very low. So if you look at like other cultures, like, the Japanese, for example, they might have one bowl of soup with 8 milligrams of iodine.
Wow.
It's a ton. It's a ton. So when we do iodine, I try to titrate it up somewhere between like 12.5 to maybe 25 milligrams, depending on the
wow.
body and how
Yeah,
much
yeah,
they can
yeah.
handle. But there's a
Yeah.
lot of like, I do not recommend just like going straight supplementing with iodine. Like there's a lot of
No.
thyroid support that has to happen before you get to
Yeah.
that point. So definitely
Yeah.
work with a practitioner around that one. But yeah, I mean, I just, the research that is coming out is just so vastly different than
Mm.
what is being preached about
Mm-hmm,
iodine.
mm-hmm.
So even in clients who have Hashimoto's, and or are, impending where they're
Yeah.
producing antibodies, often with, taking things like really slow, a lot of times those antibodies will come down with
Mm-hmm.
iodine, even though we've been
Mm-hmm.
told for
Yeah.
years, like
Yeah.
it's going to destroy it if it's autoimmune,
Yeah.
and it's just not the case.
Right. Because as you said, a lot of times people will go in without using the cofactors that you
For
need,
sure.
right? And
Yep.
it's gonna make things bad if you do that situation. Yeah. Yeah, I find that so fascinating because particularly, with things like fibrocystic breasts
Yeah.
and ovarian cysts and fibroids, which I've dealt with, like lack of iodine is a huge part of those too.
Yeah.
Do you find when you can get your clients up to that 12 to 25 number, that they can go off thyroid medication sometimes if they're on it, or does that not necessarily change that?
It can change
Mm-hmm,
it.
mm-hmm,
I haven't yet I have a handful of thyroid clients
mm-hmm,
who are actually on medication for it, but not a
mm-hmm,
ton.
mm-hmm,
So I have seen it lower dosages.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, theoretically you can get off your thyroid medication. Personally, I haven't had any clients like that yet.
Do that. Yeah. I always wonder about that because I've seen different practitioners talk about that,
Mhm.
but trying to figure out that place, and sometimes I guess how long you're on it too, it can make a
Yeah.
big difference. Yeah.
It
So
it can make a big difference.
yeah.
And the other thing too is like thyroid antibodies take a while to shift. I mean,
Mm,
you could be looking at a couple of years before your antibodies are really down into like a
mm,
good range from being high.
really high. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, do you see a decent amount of Hashimoto's in your clients or
I wouldn't
not
say
too
a
bad?
ton. I've
Mm-hmm.
probably got, I don't know, maybe only a handful over the last couple of
Mm-hmm.
years.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah. That's
Very common though.
Yes, it
Very
is.
common.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you do the mineral work and bring in these other things, how long does it usually take women to start to, really notice a difference?
That also depends. I think
Mhm.
that's very person dependent. I've
Yeah.
had some clients that like a weekend, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I feel so much better
Yeah,
already."
totally. And you're always like,
And then yeah,
hurrah! But you're
yes.
like, let's give it a few more days before you
Yeah,
settle into
right?
feeling that way. Yeah.
Yes. And then kind of in contrast, I've got some clients that are, they're at 4 months and they really don't feel a ton
Yeah.
different at all. And
Yeah.
so that's where the deeper digging starts, and the deeper
Mm-hmm.
digging into like, okay, is there something traumatic in your
Mm-hmm.
past and some nervous
Mm-hmm.
system stuff we have to address? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's very dependent on the person and on their resiliency.
Yeah. Yep.
A lot of people are super resilient to things and a lot of people are not.
Yep.
So we
Yep.
take it
Absolutely.
as much as the body will let us.
100%. And I brought that up because I think it's important for people to hear that too, that, for a lot of women, I'm sure that you see, a lot of women that I see, we're talking about years of imbalances
Yes.
before this, right? It's not just like, oh, they've been feeling bad for a few months and then they come. It's like they're at this point now where they can't do anything without seeking help, but it's really like been 20 years of this like slow downgrade, and so you can't expect that in 2, 3, 4, 6 months, sometimes like we're looking at a year before you really start to see some major differences, because these things sometimes have to go layer by layer.
They do.
Yeah.
They really do. We kind of have to peel them back slowly, I
Yep.
think. And
Yep.
that's kind of one thing about the healing journey is
Yeah.
we all want it to look like this nice
Yep.
linear upward line, and
Yep.
it just doesn't.
It
It
is
can be like a
not.
major roller coaster
Yep.
sometimes.
Yep.
But
Absolutely.
that's okay,
Yep.
because I think I think especially in the world of like the functional realm, like
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more that we can dig into. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
like if your healing journey was a roller coaster and you went to your doctor, they would be like, well, let's just put you back on birth control. And it's like,
Yep.
well, we got like 800 other things in our arsenal we can still dig into.
Yep.
Um, so
Absolutely.
there's always hope, I
Yeah.
think, for the body too.
Yeah. So when you were a PA, I mean, would you get to that point a lot of times where you're like, well, there's nothing else we can do, or you just have to be on this medication, that kind of thing?
It was, yeah, so it was really different because I worked in family practice. So
Mm,
we saw a little bit of everything.
mhm,
And mostly, I mean, mostly people came in hoping or looking to get a medication and hoping and
mm.
looking to be told
Like a
that something is
specific one.
wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I had a lot of women that would come in, like with period problems or PCOS, and they're like, yeah, I'm just really hoping to start birth control. And it's like, ugh, okay, but there's also like a big distinction between, the functional side of things and like the modern medicine side of things. And
Mm-hmm.
so as a corporation, my company was looking for me to practice modern medicine.
Right.
They weren't looking for me to practice functional medicine.
Right.
So there were some kind of like muddy waters there, I think too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it got very difficult after a while,
I bet.
like just kind of just like writing one more prescription. And it was like, man, this is just like really hard.
Yeah, yeah, because you're like, this is not getting to the root of it at
It's
all.
not,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm so
not,
glad that you were able to, get out of that and into something that you really love and like find the
yeah,
purpose, right?
yeah, for
Because
sure.
I feel like we're living in a time where we're being called to do that,
I
particularly
think
as
so
women.
too.
Yeah.
I think so too. And that's one thing I love is I feel like maybe this is just me because I'm like in my own little bubble. I don't know, but I feel like this generation is finally starting to see the pitfalls and the downfalls of how modern medicine has always done things.
Yep.
And we're looking and we're seeking alternative approaches. And I
Yep.
really feel like it's our generation that's going to propel this thing forward.
100%.
Um, and
Yep.
I honestly think a lot of it has to do with social media, and like TikTok. Like TikTok has just like blown the world of functional medicine up, I feel
Yep.
like. And people are like, what? Like their
Yeah.
eyes are finally opened and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? I mean, it's like there's good and bad when it comes to social media, but I
For
totally
sure.
agree with what you're saying. Like it takes it to so many more people and so many
Yeah.
younger people too. Although I know
Yes.
TikTok is now like apparently it's like a lot of women in their 40s are on TikTok,
Yeah.
like myself. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because timing wise, I think it was last week that big study came out on how low serotonin is not the cause of depression, essentially, right? So
Yeah.
these SSRIs that we've been using for so long, and I always want to say the caveat, like I know women that have used them and they've been helpful, and I'm not trying to take anyone's antidepressants away if they are helping them, but
Yep.
it's just kind of the information that is coming out is something that functional practitioners have been saying for years. Like
Mhm.
it's not this thing, it's not this neurotransmitter that is too low or too high or what have you. It's like there's a reason for the neurotransmitter to be too low or too high. There's all of these underlying
Yes.
things, and that's what you have to get at, including, like you just mentioned, like that trauma component that I think
Yeah.
so many of us are missing out on really digging into, and working with, because we all
Yeah.
got trauma. Like,
I know. Well, yeah, and that's part of it too, is like a lot of us kind of look at our lives and they're like, I haven't had a traumatic but even years of being under exercising and growing up in a really strict household, like that can
exactly.
even be traumatic sometimes to a young kid.
A hundred
So
percent. Yeah.
yeah.
I tell people all the time, like, because they'll be like, oh, nothing really happened bad when I was a kid. And I say, well, there's big T trauma, right? And then there's little
Yes.
T trauma. And
Yeah.
so you could have been 5 years old and like wanted something, and your mom said no. And it wasn't a bad thing that she said no, but you, as your 5 year old self, couldn't understand the why of the no. So you take it on as you've done something bad or you're wrong, and
Mhm.
that can play out as trauma in our system. Right. And
It
so
can.
that's why I'm just like, it's there for everyone on some level. We have to figure out how much it's running the show in the background. And I'm just
Yeah.
a big fan of therapy, particular somatic therapy for,
Yeah.
so many people, because it's like, to really be able to like process through that old stuff that we may or may not even remember, that's kind of running the show in the background. And so, especially if you've done all the other things for your hormones and nothing has worked.
Yes, I think so too. I've actually had a couple of clients that have kind of like hit that point where it's like, man, we've spent the last year together and we've made some changes, but they're not massive. And it's like, what's that missing piece? And it's usually nervous system dysregulation. It usually is.
100%.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that kind of also plays in is like, the belief and, kind of this identity that we create for ourselves, like we have to fully believe that our body wants to heal. We have to fully believe that our body wants to get better. And if we've got these thoughts that are running through our mind of like, well, this is just how it's going to be. And this sucks and I'm never going to feel better. Like, of course your body's not going to want to heal in a state like that.
Yep.
So we create a lot of the environment just by what we think and what we feel and what we believe too.
Absolutely. And I've been through this personally, so I know it from personal experience. It's like you can sort of work as hard in all of these things with your diet and your supplementation and, exercise and all of that. But if you have that internal monologue running on, I'm not going to get better, or like, look, you're always looking for like the thing that is showing you that you're not getting better, and then you're stuck in that loop. So the mindset, in my program, we talk about mindset, but I also talk about working on that trauma component too, because a lot of times you can't really change the mindset until you get at the trauma, so because people will be like, I'm doing affirmations, and I'm like, they're not going to work if there's this like underlying thing that's running the show, right? Those affirmations are going right out the door.
They're just words at that point.
Exactly.
They really are. I actually did last November, I think it was a 4-week virtual hypnotherapy with a hypnotherapist out of Salt Lake City. And that was amazing. I mean, digging back into like old beliefs and stuff, like going back to when you're like 4 or 5 years old and bringing up these, traumatic experiences that play out in our lives and form who we are and how we behave and how we see ourselves and how we interact with other people. And it was so interesting to like dig that deep, and also so therapeutic. Because once we weed the garden, we can plant new plants.
Exactly. So. Absolutely. Oh, so good. So tell people how they can work with you.
Yeah, for sure. So first thing, if you want to get in touch with me, Instagram is probably the place to do it. I'm most active over there. But we have so things are always moving in my world. Like we've got like something for everybody. So we've got like, mini course at like, anything from like $67 mini courses to group programs to one-on-one work. But if you want to come over and say hi on Instagram and want to find a good fit for you, just DM me. I'm more than happy to chat through things.
All right. I like it. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
It was great. All right, you guys, I will see you next time.